How do we revive interest in the good mother archetype? Well, told the truth about what they're. How do we revive interest in the good mother archetype? Well, that's a good question. I think it's a good question in part because it isn't really obvious to me that young women in our society are told the truth about what their lives are likely to be like. You know, they're taught both explicitly and implicitly that their primary interest will be in the pursuit of a dynamic career. And there's some real problems with that. The first is that the proportion of people who will have a dynamic career in the technical sense is actually quite low, because most people have jobs and not careers. And even in those jobs that might be regarded as careers, much of the work that's done is job-like. I mean, the reason that people pay you to have a job is often because you're required to do things that you wouldn't do if you weren't being paid. And so we glamorize the role of career and confuse jobs with careers and assume that most people are going to end up with high-end careers. And then we also assume that most people, even those who are qualified to have high-end careers, are actually the sort of people who would like to have high-end careers if they could. And that's also often not true. So, for example, I've worked very intensely with a large population of female lawyers, usually partners at large law firms, very, very successful women, usually very attractive, very intelligent, extraordinarily conscientious, and the sort of people who were outstanding in high school and then outstanding as undergraduates and then aced law school and then did their articling perfectly and then became associates and then eventually entered the partner stream in a large law firm and then became partners. And a huge proportion of them wake up around 30, somewhere between 30 and 32, and notice their 65-hour days and the incredibly competitive environment that they happen to be in, and the fact that the demands of their career are only going to accelerate as they move forward. I mean, they're going to make a lot of money, but the demands on their time of their career are only going to accelerate as they move forward, and decide quite rapidly that that's maybe not what they want. And the reason for that is they also would like to have a life. They'd like to have a relationship that they could attend to, and they'd like to have children. And the simple truth of the matter is that it's very, very difficult to have a truly high-end career and have an important relationship and have children, especially if there are two of you trying to pursue that at the same time. It's very difficult. And it's difficult to have a high-end career, period. And it's also difficult to have a fully functional family. Trying to combine those sorts of things makes people who are, I mean, I've seen people do it, but man, they push themselves right to their limits. And they usually have limits that exceed the limits of typical people. So one of the things we could do, for example, to revive interest in the good mother archetype is to stop telling lies to young women about what their life is likely to be like. Because my experience has been, and you might think I'm old-fashioned, although I don't really think I am, by the way. I think I'm actually quite current, and I pay a lot of attention to what's going on around me. And my experience has been overwhelmingly that high-caliber women decide in their 30s that relationship and family is the most important thing in their life. And I think the fact that major law firms, for example, have a really difficult time holding on to their high-performing women, even though they bend over backwards to do that, is actually an indication of exactly that. And this notion that it's a glass ceiling in some sense that are stopping women from advancing up the corporate ladder, I believe to be truly erroneous as well as dangerous. And I don't think there's really any evidence to support that. Annette Adler says, I have also done better in a lot of things due to your kicks in the ass. Yeah, well, I mean, that's great, Annette. I'm thrilled to hear that. Part of it, the thing about disciplining someone, let's say, is that and I see this very clearly when I'm talking to young people, is that I'm really on the side of the person that wants to do something positive with their life, to make their own life better, because I think that's where you should start. You should start by maximizing the quality of your own life. That's not a selfish thing, or if it is, it's the right kind of selfishness. And that you should figure out how to do that in a way that's of benefit to your friends and your family and your community. And you should take that deadly seriously. And the reason you should do that is because that just makes life better for everyone. and it reduces a fair bit of the misery that would otherwise be part and parcel of life, and it makes everything function smoothly. And one of the things I'm really curious about is what the world would be like if everybody decided to do that, because human beings are really remarkable creatures, and we hobble ourselves very badly with deception and resentment and revenge and the desire to make things worse and arrogance and all those sins, let's say, that make us deviate from our true path. And our true path should be something like, imagine the noblest aim that you can conceptualize and then sacrifice your life to attempting to attain it. And there's nothing in that that isn't good for everyone. And so apart from the fact that it requires a lot of responsibility, I just can't see why everyone wouldn't do that. And when I'm talking to young people and, shaking my finger and saying, grow the hell up and get mature and take on some responsibility, I'm not saying that because I'm an enemy of the person. I'm saying it because I'm the best friend of the part of them that would really like to walk in the light. And it's an invitation to walk in the light. And it would be remarkable. This is what we need to do, as far as I'm concerned, not only in the West, but in the world at large, but maybe in the West first, is we have to consciously decide that we're going to do everything we can as individuals to walk in the light, and to regard that as a noble and heroic endeavor, and to make that first and foremost in our lives. And that's what we should be educating young people to do, and they can do that. And so I have dozens of people writing to me and talking to me all the time who are saying the same thing. They're saying, look, I've really been trying to get my act together over the last 6 months. I've been trying not to lie, which is slightly different than trying to tell the truth, right? It's a more humble goal to not lie, because you can tell when you're lying, but you can't necessarily tell when you're telling the truth. And I've been coming up with a plan, and I've been trying to discipline myself, and I've been cleaning up my room, which is like a nice humble act that involves transforming chaos into order. And they write and say, God, things are just working out way better for me. It's like, whoa, do it, man. That's just, you keep that up for 15 years and you'll be unbeatable. And that's what we should be convincing young people to be, is to be unbeatable. And not because that's what they should do or because they're bad if they don't, but because there's nothing better you can possibly do with your limited and suffering bound life than to aim high and sacrifice yourself to the attainment of those goals. So that's being a highly creative woman. I find myself fearful that having kids will be spiritual suicide, hindering my endeavors, but I also don't want to have an unfulfilled life. Can I have a full life without kids? Well, yes, I suspect you can, although it's risky, Maddie, because it's really important for people to have kids, because the thing is that you get older than 40, and our culture is kind of dopey in that regards. It's underdeveloped. We live as if we only exist when we're young, and we don't. It's like, what are you going to do from the ages of, say, 45 to 90 or 95? You need a family around you. You need to see your children grow. You need to have grandchildren. It's a major part, maybe the most important part of the last half of life. Now, you said, being a highly creative woman, I find myself fearful that having kids will be spiritual suicide. Well, that's the part of your question that I would really address, because I would say, well, don't let them be spiritual suicide. It may be that there's a certain amount of time that you need to take away from the kids, and this is the case for parents in general, so that you can pursue your own creative endeavors. Children do not have to devour your life. In fact, if you let them devour your life, then you'll hate them and you'll mistreat them. And so what you want to do is to set yourself up so that you can have children and have a life. And that's better for the children, and it's better for you. Like, children can be taught, encouraged to spend a fair bit of time, not when they're infants, obviously, but to spend a fair bit of time amusing themselves. And that's especially the case if you have more than one child, because they'll mutually amuse one another. It's actually easier in some ways to have more than one child, because with one child, you're constantly amusing the child, but with 2 or 3, then they're off in their little, club, especially if you can stop them from developing sibling rivalry that's too intense, and they can monitor themselves. So the trick is, if you're a highly creative woman, is be disagreeable enough so that you can carve yourself out your own space, so that you don't come to resent your children. And you're afraid of that. You're afraid that, it looks like, you're afraid that if you give yourself to children, there'll be nothing left for you. And that can happen if you have children who have terrible health problems, for example, but you can't protect yourself against those eventualities in life anyways. But I would say your best bet is to be a more selfish mother. And believe me, I've had more clients who were ruined by mothers who were too unselfish than I've had clients who were ruined by mothers who were too selfish. So you need to be there when the kids need you, but you shouldn't be there any more than is necessary. So let's see. Adam Watts says, I feared having kids for the same reason. I'm a full-time pro artist. You make your own normal, said my therapist. JP is speaking the truth. Yeah, well, that's the thing. You know, don't be thinking that you can't organize your life when you have children. The thing about modern people is that they're terrified of children. And it's because they regard children as if they're miniature tyrants. And they can be, of course, because anyone will tyrannize over you if you allow them to. Perhaps not anyone, but virtually anyone. Why not regulate your children's behavior? I wrote a chapter in my new book called Don't Let Your Children Do Anything That Makes You Dislike Them. And that's like really serious advice. It's like if you allow your children to conduct themselves around you in a manner that makes you dislike them, if you're being honest, if you're paying attention to the shadow side of yourself that can be aggressive and destructive, then if you allow your children to do things that make you dislike them, then having children is going to mess up your life. But you don't have to do that. You actually have a tremendous amount of control over the quality of your relationship with your children, and also the manner in which you choose to disperse your time. And I mean, if you're willing to think it through and be clear, you can be in charge of your household. The children don't have to be in charge. And it's not good for them to be in charge anyways. So people are afraid of children, and it's too bad because children are absolutely wonderful. I mean, you have to be careful with them, and they get tired and they get hungry and they get hot, and they don't have an attention span that's as long as an adult who has a long attention span. But they're great company, and they're unbelievably comical, and they love you, and like they give back far more than they take if you have an ounce of sense when you're dealing with them. So yeah, so don't be afraid of children, man. You're the adult, for God's sake. You've got the upper hand, and if you have a partner you can rely on, well then, you know, you can both decide how it is that you're going to run your household so that you're actually thrilled to death that you have kids and that you have a life.
How much responsibility do you feel